So when I got asked to write the theme song for The Big Bang Theory, it was on the heels of 5 or 6 massive disappointments in a row. They were really nice on the phone call, but I just never got around to writing the song. So I'm just going to call them and tell them, hey, thank you so much for thinking of me, but I just haven't had time to do this. And I was going to suggest a few people that I thought would be really good. And I said to my wife, I got this phone call. She said, who's it with? And I said, Chuck Lorre. And she said, do you mean Chuck Lorre? I said, I don't know, I guess so. And she said, you should Google him. And so it was like less than 20 minutes to the phone call. I got in the shower. The whole song came to me in the shower. I called my wife in and said, can you please write this down before I forget it? She wrote down all the lyrics for me. I got out of the shower, threw on a bathing suit, and I recorded The Big Bang Theory into the built-in microphone in my laptop. I didn't even use any external gear. I used GarageBand and the built-in microphone. And I sent it 5 minutes before the conference call. Chuck and Bill got on and said, you know, at the end where you tag the line, you go, it all started with a big bang, bang. It all started with a big bang. I go, yeah. He goes, can we lose the tag and just do the line once? And I go, yeah. He goes, great. We love it. Biggest thing in my entire career is it's eclipsed everything else I've ever done.
The most special thing about how you created that theme song was that Barenaked Ladies is the kind of music that the characters on The Big Bang Theory listen to. You know, it's like meta upon meta. So the reason that, you know, we would go to Comic-Cons, the reason that we would fill that big, you know, convention hall is because we were a show about the people who go to Comic-Con. We were a show about the people who, like, are the Barenaked Ladies in terms of, like, the geek rock, the nerd rock aspect. And, like, you know, you guys are the guys that, like, made it big.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you, because you know she knows a thing or two. So now she's gonna break down. So break down. She's gonna break it down.
Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik.
And I'm Jonathan Cohen.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. We're gonna break it down for you. We know a thing or two.
We have the songwriter for the catchiest podcast jingle maybe in history. I know it was stuck in my head for many, many months.
We're going to be talking to lead singer and founder of Barenaked Ladies, Ed Robertson. You may also know him not just from their a million hits like One Week and Pinch Me and If I Had $1 Million, but Ed also wrote and sings the theme song to The Big Bang Theory. So he's been a part of my life for an incredibly long amount of time. And it was on a wing and a prayer that we approached Ed, our fellow Canadian, to write the theme song to our podcast, and he did. But I have to say, nothing means more to me than this episode in terms of the time that he gives us to share so much of his childhood, his career, his Canadianness, and his incredible process as a human being.
Also, the level of depth and introspection he has and emotional awareness that he's gained from feeling less than and having issues with his dad to a pretty unbelievable plane crash that he survived. And he goes into more detail in it here than maybe ever before.
Barenaked Ladies has a new album out, In Flight. We're also going to talk about how he writes, why he writes, and what is it about his voice that is so iconic. It's rare that you speak to a musician and they talk the way they sing, but I can hear his singing voice in his speaking voice in a way that I don't know another musician that I can say that about. He's so intelligent, he's so articulate, and he goes really deep with us. And it's such a pleasure to have the man who sings about us breaking it down for you, break it down for you. So it is our pleasure to welcome Ed Robertson to The Breakdown. Break it down.
Hey, Ed. How are you?
The always handsome Jonathan has joined us.
You know, Vanity Fair referred to him as hunky.
I would have been more loquacious, but hunky is certainly fitting.
But it was qualified. They did say hunky Canadian, so like in America, maybe that's like it's downgraded.
The first time we played a big festival in the UK was the Glastonbury Festival, and we got out of a van having driven overnight after an overnight flight. And a lovely young woman ran up to us excitedly with a clipboard and said, "Oh my God, Barenaked Ladies, you're here. So exciting." And we said, "Oh, that's cool that you know who we are." And she says, "It says here, fat bearded Canadians."
No!
Didn't say hunky, Jonathan. It said fat bearded Canadians.
This feels like a great place to start. Ed, we're so happy that you're here. We have so many intersection points. You wrote the theme song to Mayim Bialik's Breakdown, which is such a phenomenally exciting thing that, first of all, just someone from a band that I love so much, that we have this connection. Also, like my favorite thing pretty much on the planet is Jonathan, and he's Canadian and you're Canadian. So there's this like wonderful Toronto, Canada thing going on. And also you wrote the theme song to the television show that I was on for a decade. But that was like, I joined the show through almost 4 years after it started. So you had a relationship with my job before I did. So many interesting connection points. I kind of want to start. I
also wrote the theme song for Blossom. I don't know if you remember that.
No, you didn't. That was Dr. John.
I didn't.
That was Dr. John. Mostly I'm excited to talk to you because Jonathan will start talking more like a Canadian when he talks to other Canadians. So I'm just going to enjoy all the vowels.
We get around our people and something in our brain just changes.
Monday becomes Monday. We start apologizing for everything.
Everything becomes a question?
Yeah. Do you know, Mayim, do you know how you get 30 Canadians out of a pool?
How?
Just ask.
And before we go too far, I think it should be said that, because you're acknowledging the theme songs, and number one, like millions and millions and millions of people have the Big Bang theme song stuck in their head for endless periods of time. And for us, I had the podcast theme song stuck in my head for at least 15 months straight. Like it just gets in there and never leaves. And I'm sure that, listeners have the same experience. It's kind of unbelievable that you can do that.
Well, I'll tell you, I am often intrigued by a guest you've had on. And so I'll click to listen, and it's always for some reason, I always forget I wrote the theme song. And I hear my son play that slippery guitar lick coming in. I'm like, oh yeah, this is cool.
There seems to be something, about the way that you write that really does lend itself to a very kind of familiar groove in the brain, that your music seems to really, it's not just that your music is intelligent, interesting, enjoyable, musically pleasing. There's really something about a hook to the way that you write. And I wonder, is this something, is it like a conscious thing? Like, oh, I write a certain way that produces things that have that kind of hook? Or do you think it's just something that comes as you're writing? Do you know what I mean? Am I crazy?
I think we're all crazy in some way, Mayim, but I certainly am always trying to write things that are interesting to me. And sometimes that involves some lyrical complexity. Sometimes it involves some melodic wizardry. I'm always looking for every advantage I can give the melody and the lyric to be memorable. And so sometimes it involves just tweaking a little. People give Nickelback shit constantly. They're like the band everybody loves to hate. But Chad is such a good writer. And he has this way of tweaking a melody or a chord to make it interesting and memorable. They've done that from their first single. I've been a Nickelback defender since the beginning. You will never see me come home and put on a Nickelback record. But every time, the thousands of times I heard their songs come on the radio or on the video channel, I was always like, oh, that's cool. That's cool what he did there. So yeah, I think as writers, we're striving to communicate an idea, and then we're using every tool we've got to make it interesting and memorable.
So in the same vein, and also sort of, the flip side of that is, I think memorables, that's a really important word. And also your writing, your lyrical writing in so many cases is also marked by a very densely concentrated, like, fluctuation of words and thoughts. And, many people think about that in 1 week, and many people think about that in the Big Bang Theory, theme. How is it that you sort of are able to balance both, being musically memorable and, having these songs that are so, enduring in terms of, they really get in you and you want to hear them over and over, while also being able to be this real word master and lyrical master? Like, how do you see those kind of fitting together? And I think it's one of the most interesting parts of your success is being able to hold both of those things.
A buddy of mine that I've written a bunch of songs with, a local Toronto guy called Ian Lefevre, he calls it my verbal Tetris. He goes, you got to do your verbal Tetris thing on this verse where everything just locks together and there's every piece is perfect. That comes from hip hop. Like, I was such a rap and hip hop fan from the time I was a teenager, and that stuff is all about rhythmic complexity and rigorous rhythmic implementation. There's very little melody in it, and it makes up for that melodic variation with rhythmic variation. So when you take a pop sensibility or like a rock sensibility, like what I grew up with, and then you add this layer of rhythmic complexity onto the melodic simplicity of a rock line, you get something pretty interesting, I think. And that's a tool I've always had in my belt because I'm such a hip hop fan. I will often dive into that kind of rhythmic structure.
Ed, growing up listening to hip hop and rap, was there ever a moment where you were like, oh, I should do that too?
I don't think so, because I grew up on Rush and The Who and Max Webster, and I wanted to be a guy with a guitar rocking out on stage. But I as you said, I also grew up on country music. I love a story song, and then got totally blown away by electronic and hip hop music in my late teens. And I think what has always been a strength or an asset for me is just seeing it all as music. I was never a punk guy where every other music was crap, or a rock guy where every other music was crap. I was always into everything and trying to figure out how to incorporate it into my own writing. When I was trying to learn the guitar solo from Limelight off Rush's Moving Pictures, I was also standing in front of the mirror and miming Howard Jones lyrics. I just had such an eclectic appreciation of music. It's all I wanted to do from the first time I picked up a guitar, and I liked it all.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by BetterHelp. I'm told that there are people who look forward to end of year season holiday gatherings, but for many of us, The end of the year is a hard time. I get seasonal blues. There's a lot of stress that comes with preparing for the holiday season. It can be a lot. And I'm glad to know that I'm not alone. It's normal to feel sadness or anxiety for some of us, but I'm going to go ahead and suggest that therapy can be a bright spot amid all of the stress and change that happens at the holidays. It's something to look forward to, something to make you feel grounded, and something to give you tools to manage everything that's going on. If you're thinking of starting therapy, why not give BetterHelp a try this holiday season? It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a questionnaire. They'll match you with a licensed therapist, and you can switch at any time for no additional charge. Find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Go to betterhelp.com/break today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/break. Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Ritual. You know who's kind of a hot mess? Everyone. Perfection's an illusion. Give it up already. And that is coming from a vitamin and supplement company. Ritual knows it's basically impossible to get all the nutrients you need from your diet 100% of the time, but don't worry. They made a multivitamin that helps you focus on what's important, like filling key nutrient gaps to support foundational health. It's easy and painless to incorporate Ritual products into your daily routine. I've done it, and I love that they're vegan friendly. And Ritual multivitamins are 100% made traceable with high quality key ingredients in clean bioavailable forms. You can trust what you're putting in your body. They have delayed release capsules. They're designed to dissolve later in the small intestine. That's an ideal place to absorb nutrients. And they're non-GMO project verified, gluten and major allergen free. And as I said, vegan. Ritual's essential prenatal high quality formulation with nature identical choline and clinically studied methylated folate support baby's neural tube development before and during pregnancy. They contain 350 milligrams vegan, sustainably sourced omega-3 DHA to support baby's brain development during pregnancy. A minty or citrus essence in every bottle keeps things fresh and helps make taking your multis every day actually enjoyable. Instead of striving for perfect health, aim for supporting foundational health. Great news, Ritual's offering our listeners 30% off during your first month. Go to ritual.com/breakdown to start Ritual or add Essential for Women 18 plus or prenatal to your subscription today. I don't know if I'm the only non-Canadian wondering about country music in Canada. Keep in mind, we Americans know very little about anything besides like the city that we live in, much less like the state or the country or the world. But when I think of country music, you know, it's for me, it's like such a quintessential, like American, Southern, you know, kind of art form. And, you know, I think especially of, you know, before that, I think of blues. I think of, you know, the music that came out of the culture of, you know, this country in the South. I wonder, you know, I think that Canadians often, you know, tease so many things about America. I wonder what does country music sort of symbolize when you think of like, you know, the culture that it comes from and how far away that is, you know, from the way you grew up?
Well, I think, first of all, the only advantage Canadians have over Americans is that we consumed all of your media growing up. We literally watched your TV stations and all of your films and listened to all of your music. We had sort of parallel, you know, you guys had Hee Haw, we had the Tommy Hunter Show. You guys had Hank Williams, we had Hank Snow. You know, and these were amazing performers and writers, but they were, just as all country music was, they were all influenced by each other. They were doing their own thing, and we had amazing country and folk artists. We had a very distinctly East Coast maritime kind of folk and country scene. But it was all incredibly influenced and cross-pollinated with American performers and writers. A lot of stuff was relegated to Canada only, and you wouldn't have heard it. But lots of our stars, you know, Anne Murray, for example, or, you know, she dominated the country charts in the late 70s through the 80s into the 90s. So a lot of it was kind of piggybacking on what was happening in America, but we also kind of developed our own scene. And then famously the kind of Yorkville scene, which sprung Joni Mitchell and Neil Young and, you know, They immediately moved to California, but we still claim them as our own.
You have a new album. Barenaked Ladies has a new album in flight. It's your 18th studio album. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Wow. And you've been quoted as saying that this was the easiest writing period that you've had. Is it true that you wrote 8 songs in a day?
I don't know what happened, but well, I have some guesses actually. It's the first time in our career we just marked 35 years a couple of days ago, and last spring was the first time in 35 years that we said, we're taking these 2 months off to write. And it's sacred. We've never done that. We've said, okay, we're going to kind of write during this time period. And then it'd be like, oh, we got an offer for a festival here. Great, let's do it. Okay, we got this private offer, corporate offer. Okay, let's do that. We got to fill the bank accounts. Got to pay everybody still, yes, we need to write a record, but we got bills to pay. And this is the first time in 3.5 decades that we called the writing period sacred and said no to everything. Actually said, don't even ask. This time is off. And it allowed me to relax into a place where I knew there was nothing on my calendar. My wife actually went away she took her mom to Antarctica. They did this fantastic trip. Her mom's in her late 70s and, kind of said one day, oh, that's a bucket list trip for me. I'll probably never get to go. And my wife just totally called her bluff. She was like, let's go. Ed's trying to write a record, it'd be great to get out of the house and, give him some time. So I had fragments of songs, I had little snippets, I had couplets and maybe a melody idea. I think I had about 20, 22 ideas that were just ideas, just a lyric or just a little melody with a fragment of a lyric. And I sat down on a Monday and said, I want to finish one today. If I can finish one song today, I'm going to feel good about writing. And at 10 o'clock, I looked up and I'd finished 8 songs.
Wow.
And I started texting the other guys like, I don't know what happened today, but I started sending them MP3s of just me singing. And I was listening back to them and I thought, well, maybe I just wrote 8 crappy songs and that'd be fine too.
I was going to say, are they all the same chords and the same tempo?
Well, I wondered that, and I started making, I skipped lunch and dinner because I was just, ideas kept coming. I started making myself a late dinner and listening back to the songs. I was thinking, I really like these. I basically wrote a whole record today. And I really like the songs.
Maybe your wife needs to go to Antarctica more.
Yeah. Or at least just, to the park for a couple of hours.
And did you find that, was that a spiritual experience when you look at the sort of what was flowing through you? A lot of creatives talk about sort of being, getting into the pocket or into the flow or sort of just channeling. What do you attribute sort of the internal experience that you had while doing that?
It felt like I was pulling from everything I learned all day. And I wasn't feeling the pressure of a deadline. I also had kind of set myself a goal of not trying to be so slippery on this record, not trying to be so slick and wordy and overly clever. I actually said to a few friends, I want to write some simple songs on this record, some simple, honest songs where I'm not overthinking myself and just kind of want to let it come out. And I think it just served me really well to be relaxed, not feel the pressure of a deadline, be alone and uninterrupted, and kind of approach it as a craft. I think I'm finally getting to the point in my career where I'm not trying to impress anyone anymore. I'm not striving for a hit. I'm not looking for a chart position. I'm looking to express an idea, communicate something, and that's kind of all it has to be.
That's beautiful, and a lot of relevancy, I think, to people in their everyday lives, not trying to impress, not trying to chart top or be, angled towards some outcome, but just sort of drop into an authentic expression. So that's really nice.
I want to touch on What Do We Need a little bit, which is this beautiful song on this album. And, I would never describe your songwriting as simple, but there is a simplicity, to this song in particular. And I asked Valerie to turn it off because it was making me cry. And you have one of those voices that often sort of brings me to tears, even when there's joy, even when it's not sad. But I am a person who often weeps.
He's such a terrible singer.
Exactly. No, not like that. But there's something in this song that feels, there's a melancholy to it. And, the lyrics are beautiful. And I said to Jonathan, look, he wrote us a new theme song for our life.
That's very sweet of you to say. That's my Scottish heritage, deflecting all compliments at all times. You will not compliment me.
But there really is something to, this notion that, especially in our culture, we live in this kind of culture of excess, both, kind of materially, but also conceptually. And, after COVID, I think a lot of us sort of had a sort of a realignment of sort of like, what are we all doing? And, Jonathan and I started this podcast during COVID because we were all, kind of living with everything that was in our head. And so I wondered, does this song feel like that kind of reflection, or is it just like, I'm very curious how this one came to you in particular, because it really does capture, speaking of your Scottish heritage, it's so melancholy, right? There's almost an irony to it. And also like, I don't know, I'm just like crying thinking about it. Tell us a little bit about what do we need?
The pandemic for me was incredibly revealing. And I felt guilty about what a lovely time I had. My family and I went up to our lake spot, and we kind of hibernated there for 18 months. I never thought I would get to, it's my favorite place on the planet. And I never thought I would get to spend that kind of time there until I was in my late 70s or something. I thought one day I'll get to spend a lot of time here, but it seemed like a distant reality. And when we were forced to get off the road and get out of studios and not be around anybody, everybody had different reactions to it. And, I was incredibly lucky because I had this beautiful place to go, and my kids were there with me and my wife, and it was really, really lovely. And I always wondered what it would feel like if I couldn't get up in front of applauding, appreciative crowds night after night after night. I talked about it with my wife for years, like, at some point this is going to stop, and what's that going to be like? Like, I'm going to need you to clap for me when I walk in the room, and as I leave, you have to clap long after I go, and then I'll come back in for one last bow. I might even say one more thing before I go, but what just happened? I just got
That's your applause.
That's a new Apple gestures thing, I think. I don't know.
You just gave yourself balloons.
It's supposed to do stuff now. I don't know. I don't know.
What's happening?
I don't know how it happens, but it happens.
You deserve it. You
See?
deserve
Yeah.
that.
I don't know. I don't know why that's happening. But anyway.
For people only listening, we just had balloons come across the screen. When Ed said he needed applause and wanted accolades, he got balloons.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, iOS 17, for that lovely surprise. So,
Apple, please send the advertising money directly to us.
so I always wondered what that would be like to kick into a way lower gear and be off the radar and be sitting with myself and my thoughts. And it was, admittedly, it was a little bit worrisome. Because I haven't had to be in that headspace for my entire adult life. And I found, to my surprise and delight, and I think to the shock and delight of my wife, that I really, really loved it. And paradoxically, it made me really appreciate performing even more, because then I knew I was doing it out of a desire to do it, not a desperate need for the attention and appreciation of the crowds. So it kind of eliminated that variable for me. I struggled with insecurity my whole life, imposter syndrome. And I don't think you will find a lot of performers that don't grapple with some level of insecurity. And I did a lot of work. I did a lot of therapy to try and understand that and grow and learn and be more self-confident and more self-sufficient. And I think it just coincided nicely with being able to retreat into my own space, have a lot of time to reflect, and then go back out into this incredible life that I've built and perform on my own terms, kind of, and what do we need is just about that simplicity. It's like all my dreams came true a long time ago. So I've got to just enjoy this now. And that, of course, that can be scaled to so many different lives and experiences. For me, it was just about being very reflective and appreciative, grateful.
Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Lumi, family, friends, and Lumi whole body deodorant. These are the things I am thankful for this year. Why? Well, Lumi is a deo like no other. It was created by an OBGYN who discovered and saw firsthand how normal BO was being misdiagnosed and mistreated. And it's not just an underarm thing, it's an all over thing. So she developed a pH optimized deodorant that is clinically proven to block odor everywhere. Not just your pits, but your privates, your feet, and beyond. It's seriously safe to use anywhere on your body. The best part, no matter where you use it, Lumi is clinically proven to block and control odor all day and to even keep working for up to 72 hours. If 3 days of odor control isn't something to be thankful for, I don't know what is. Unlike some deodorants that try to mask odor with fragrance, Lumi is formulated and powered by mandelic acid to stop odor before it starts, more like a pre-odorant. It's baking soda free and paraben free. It's pH balanced for safe use below the belt. Lumi is clinically proven to control odor better than a shower with soap alone 12 hours after a shower. The average person has an odor level of 6 out of 10. With Lumi, the average odor is a 0 out of 10. I'll take that. Lumi's starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, which I like a lot, a cream tube deodorant, and 2 free products of your choice. Like they have a mini body wash, deodorant wipes, and free shipping. I love that this is something you can use anywhere on your body. And I also love that they're not doing with yucky chemicals. So Lumi is a win for me, and as a special offer for our listeners, you can win too. New customers get $5 off Lumi's starter pack with our exclusive code and link. For a limited time, returning customers can get $5 off their next purchase of $30 or more. Use code MAYIM at lumideodorant.com. LumiDeodorant.com. Thank you, Lumi, for making this holiday season smell a whole lot better. I want to ask you to elaborate a little bit on that. One of the really incredible things that's happened, with this podcast is we get people like yourself, people who have lives beyond most of our wildest dreams in terms of success and fame and notoriety and, in many cases, a life that many of us can't even imagine, But I think it's really important that you said that you can scale that. And, what I don't want people to think, and I know you don't either, which is why I kind of want you to flesh it out a little bit more, is that like, if I become a famous singer, like I'm in Barenaked Ladies, like I'll have everything I need. And then, what you're talking about is a mindset of satisfaction, sufficiency, and enoughness. Am I right?
Totally. I mean, I had a #1 worldwide hit and was selling millions and millions of records, but I was personally kind of a mess at the time, really struggling with motivation and with insecurity and doubt and on and off depression. Fame and attention gives you all kinds of access and gives, it certainly gives you money and it gives you experiences, but it doesn't fix you, It also amplifies your deficiencies and aggravates your insecurities. I grew up as a child in an alcoholic household. My father was a high-functioning alcoholic, but a non-communicative alcoholic. And so you spend a lot of energy kind of ignoring the dinosaur in the room and vying for an attention you will never get. And it wasn't until close to my father's passing that I really kind of found some peace with that. And it took an enormous amount of work, decades of working through it, teasing through it. So this peace and comfort I find myself in now is hard won. It's not an enlightening moment. It's decades of hard work.
First of all, we're so appreciative that you're, willing to speak this frankly about this kind of stuff. It's not for nothing, that the way that many of us grow up, sometimes just gets sort of like pushed away, swept under a rug. Like, we don't talk about it. I'm fine. I can do it. And I think you're the 5th of 5. Is that correct?
Yep. I'm the baby.
You're the baby. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit, my decades of work, in case anyone's curious, have been spent really trying to cultivate compassion. Compassion for the alcoholic is sort of the phrase that we use. Compassion for the alcoholic while still being able to say, this changed me in ways that were not my choosing, and I wonder, when you sort of look back, and I think, you've spoken about this. Your dad, you said, was a pretty high functioning alcoholic, which many are. The notion of like a derelict or a bum or someone on the street is a very small percentage of those who who have problems with alcohol. Do you know, like, emotionally, like, who your dad was in terms of why he drank? Like, what was he running from, or what was he protecting? Because, I always like to remind people, like, alcohol is not the problem. Drugs is not the problem. Is being sober. The problem is living with, whether it's your demons or, your insecurity. Do you know who your dad was in terms of what sort of shaped that for him?
Well, I think I spent way too much energy and time worrying that I was the problem, that I wasn't worthy of love, or that I wasn't worth the attention, or it took me so long to realize that it had nothing to do with me, You know, I was the fifth of five, and I was a distant, like my siblings were all kind of a year and a half apart. And then there was a 7-year gap and then me. So
Oh.
I also, you know, I felt like the accident, you know, like I wasn't in the plan. And maybe that was part of the reason he was depressed or whatever. I tried to make myself the reason. You know, I felt like somehow I was to blame for it, or that you know, I felt responsibility in it in some way. And that really made it harder to understand and harder to deal with. Because I think my dad really sank into alcoholism more so, you know, when I was younger. And like I remember moments of exasperation looking at old family photos of vacations and stuff and just thinking, like, why didn't we ever do that? Like, you did that with my older brothers and sisters, but never with me. So I always kind of felt alone, and I felt responsible for his sadness, I think. What I didn't realize was another part of it that was a real struggle for me is because that relationship was so broken, I wasn't able to reciprocate in any way. Like, I guess I had expectations of what being a good son could be. And I was never able to do that. And I hadn't really articulated that to myself, but I was talking about the frustration I felt whenever I visited my dad, and that it was hard not to expect something from him. I would try to not expect anything, but I would leave disappointed. And I couldn't make sense of it. And this amazing therapist I had, he said, you know, just because he was a shitty dad doesn't mean you have to be a shitty son. And it really threw me for a loop, because I didn't realize that I was lacking that gift, or that, even if it was one way. You know, I think part of what I was frustrated about was like, I didn't feel I could do anything nice for him because it was only going to disappoint me, or he wouldn't care, or he doesn't deserve it. Whatever it was in my head, I had rationalized that I couldn't do anything to help him until he helped himself, or whatever that rationale was. And that line just bowled me over. And so I started, just when I'd go visit my dad, I'd bring a bunch of frozen meals and put them in his freezer for him, you know, and ask him if he needed anything. Could I run and grab him anything from the store or whatever? Brought my sons a couple times to have lunch with him, you know, and I would say I got nothing in return, but I got so much just by participating in acts of kindness towards him. It was just a gift. Like, and I'm so glad I turned that corner a year and a bit before he passed. It really helped me understand that he was depressed, he was self-medicating, and it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my issue to solve. And, you know, then I was able to see, like, okay, well, this guy was struggling for decades, and he still managed to go work in a factory day after day after day. There was a roof over my head, food on the table. He wasn't physically or verbally abusive to me. You know, there were lots of, I was lucky in a lot of ways, even though I had a totally non-communicative alcoholic father. You know, and that advice allowed me to kind of move on. I remember when he passed, I was standing with my siblings, and it kind of it all washed over me, and I was crying, and I said, God, I was so mad for so long. Like I feel a sense of relief now, And my sister-in-law said, "It's okay, Ed. It's okay, Ed. He didn't know." And I said, "Oh no, he knew. I told him." And yeah, I guess I'm grateful for having put in the work and having reflected on it enough to grow from it, and it took a while, but now I have lots of positive memories of my childhood, and my dad was a funny guy and a smart guy. He was just drunk a lot of the time. And my anger was not allowing me to enjoy what was good and supportive and fatherly about him. That was all erased by what was disappointing about him. And with a little time and more work, it allowed me to connect more to the parts of my family that were really good and positive. And my mom was a saint. My mom certainly facilitated and covered for his alcoholism, but she also was the most supportive person in the world to me, and so verbose about her love for me and appreciation and support. And she was the biggest Barenaked Ladies fan in the world. So, I had that. On the flip side, I had that support from her.
This is something that, I have teenagers. They're 15 and 18. And, these are conversations that we have that I didn't really have with my parents just because times were different. But did you ever think about sort of what your relationship with alcohol might be like or might not be like? Because, it's so ubiquitous, in our culture. There's this notion of well, everybody smokes weed and everybody drinks. And I don't know, that might be true. But I also know that I get really itchy about that because I know how much numbing can feel good. And I wonder, was that something you sort of considered? Or then when you became a dad, was it something you thought about differently?
Well, I decided at a really young age to just never start. I come from a long line of alcoholics, and I just thought it was too dangerous of territory for me. So I avoided it. People always assume I'm sober, and they'll ask say, "Oh, I don't drink. Oh, did you have a really rough?" No, I decided in the 6th grade that I was never going to start. And it was probably mostly because this kid named Scott Bellamy said, "Yeah, you say that now, but you'll see, you'll be drinking when you're 20. So mostly at 52, I did this to prove to Scott Bellamy that I was going to. But so I think my journey with substance abuse or, alcohol, drugs, whatever, has actually been easy. Because it was a decision I made really young and just stuck with it. So it's never been a temptation for me. But then it was difficult to talk to my kids about why that was the right decision for me, but didn't have to be their decision. They can follow their own path and do what is right for them, but I wanted to communicate to them with no uncertainty why I had made this decision and why I felt in our family it was a risk, and that I wanted them to be aware of that and let them know that their mother and I would, be there for them, and just to be careful. And it hasn't been a speed bump free journey for my kids. But they know I love and support them, and that's something I never had. So hopefully they'll, I know they'll figure it out.
How do you have that kind of discipline? I mean, like when people, and maybe it's because you're Canadian, but when people hear about like the music industry, like it's like I don't want to see any more documentaries about music because I'm so not able to handle what that culture is like. What is that like for you, literally being in the middle of it? I mean, next I'm going to ask you, like, how do you stay married to someone for 30 years anywhere, much less in that business? Like, what is that sort of discipline for you, in terms of being in the middle of such a different culture in your industry? And again, this is something I think that people can scale because, I went to a large college with a huge, Greek system, and like I would go to these parties and I was like, I don't want to drink until I vomit. It's just not interesting to me. Like, I don't want to black out. Is it just like that's how you were made, or what was that like?
I hear stories of other bands that sound radically different from the experience of my band. Not everybody I'm the only one in the band that doesn't drink or smoke weed, or like I'm
Partake.
the only guy. Yeah, doesn't partake in something. But the band was never like a shit show. Like, I think we just always took the job so seriously. And, none of us would have tolerated somebody being messed up for a show. Like, we were too driven and too professional about performing. So if anybody, was partying and flying off the handle, it was after the show, and showing up for work the next day ready to rock. So, we had a relatively public issue about 15 years ago, and one of the band members we parted ways with. But the talk of substance abuse was actually kind of a red herring in the whole story. It was way more about interpersonal dynamics than it was about rampant partying. It really wasn't about that at all.
And can you talk a little bit about sort of the culture of being in a marriage for such a long time, which is an anomaly in general. I'm just going to say it. But especially in that industry, I mean, I'm assuming your answer might be similar. But I am, kind of, curious. I don't need to know the details of like your wife's life or what she does for a living, but like she's been with you through the vast majority of this life of yours. And I wonder what your, kind of romantic, connection is like through all of this journey of fame.
Well, when we started dating, my wife was lifeguarding at the YMCA and she was paying for all of our dates because I had this fledgling rock band. I don't think her parents could have been more disappointed when she brought me home at age 18 or 19. Like, I think we were 18. And she was the breadwinner because she was making that YMCA bank as a lifeguard, And I was playing club gigs and splitting $21 takes for a night with a whole band. Like, it was nutty. But, we got married in 94. So this year will be our 30th wedding anniversary is coming up next summer. But my wife always says, 30 years, 27 happy years. Because I tell so many people, marriage it's work. Like, it's a commitment to a person. And the number of times I've heard someone say, I love him, I just wasn't in love anymore. I just think that's such a cop-out. It's like, no kidding. my wife said to me, I can be the greatest wife and partner on the planet, but I can't compete with new. I can't compete with a girlfriend. That's just not fair. It's not a fair playing field. And she's amazing. I have an incredible partner. It has not been, the road has not been ever smooth, but I'm super grateful we are still on it.
This leads perfectly to my next question about the time that you crashed a plane when she was in it.
Yeah. And we're still together.
So
Yeah.
I wasn't going to ask. And, also you lost your brother the year before you got married. Like, there's been a lot, as there is, in a life. But in particular, I don't want to poke at this, but I'm fascinated about, first of all, flying a plane is awesome. But I'm curious, was that moment, how was it defining in your relationship? Was it like, what didn't it bring up, I guess is what I would ask.
Yeah, well, it brings up a lot. It brought up a ton of personal struggle for me because getting my pilot's license and being a good pilot was something I was so proud of. And it was at a time when I was struggling with a lot of things personally, and I was unable to kind of internalize my success as a writer, as a performer. I always thought like, yeah, I'm in this huge famous band. I've sold millions of records, but that's just lucky. Like, we're just lucky. There's way more musicians I've run into that are better than me, and I just got lucky. And I was never willing to attribute any of our success to the hard work and dedication to our craft. I was not able to accept that. And getting my pilot's license and doing my instrument rating and doing my float rating and being a proficient pilot was something I had to earn, and there was no luck involved. And my sort of credibility in that world was really important to me. And because it was something that was all about technical execution, and I had to pass all these incredibly difficult Transport Canada exams that don't give a shit that I'm the guy in Barenaked Ladies. I have to have the knowledge. I have to do the calculations. I have to execute in the cockpit and fly with proficiency. And I was so proud of that. And I had, the jokes came all the time about rock stars and airplanes. And I was always like, that's not me. I'm a great pilot. I take it very seriously. And I'm not the weekend warrior Yahoo rock star who can just afford a plane. I'm the guy who became a really good pilot. And then I crashed. And it shook me. Like, all I could think of was I could have killed my wife, myself, the friends we had in the plane. I would have left 6 children between our 2 families, orphaned. And all I could imagine was what I had done wrong. I crashed really close to our lake house. And for about a week, I would wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat going, oh my God, I just realized what I did wrong. I set the altimeter backwards. I wasn't at the right pressure altitude. I was 200 feet lower than I thought I was. And I would put a headlamp on and hike out to the wreckage, which was still in the forest. They hadn't cleared it away yet. I'd check my calculations for the day, and I'd go out and look at the altimeter and go, oh no, it was set right. It wouldn't matter anyway because I was flying visually, but I would have these like weird things in the middle of the night. Oh my God, I don't remember retracting flaps. Oh my God, did I do that? And I would hike into the forest with my headlamp on, and I'd go check the aircraft. And I kept looking for something I had done wrong.
Oh.
And I couldn't find it. And that was really hard. And I got another gift from the insurance guy who was investigating the crash. And he said, how are you doing? How are you doing with all of this? And I said, well, I'm kind of beating myself up that I didn't do the northbound takeoff on the lake. I did the westbound takeoff. And he said, how much runway do you have on the westbound? I was like, 8,000 feet. And I would have had 18,000 if I was going north, right? Mm. But the wind suggested a westbound takeoff. I said, I'm kind of beating myself up. I didn't go north because it was like a microburst storm kind of pushed me into the hill, into the trees. And he said, so if you'd done the northbound takeoff, that might have nosed you into the lake or made you cartwheel into the water. And he was like, you had a good result here. You broke an airplane and some trees, and everybody walked away. You need to stop second guessing yourself. I've interviewed the places where you fuel up. I've interviewed your past instructors. They do a really thorough investigation. He said, everyone said you're a good pilot. You're very thorough about your details. You had an accident, and when it went to shit, you did everything right. You need to move on. It was hard to do that because it was such a kind of blow to my psyche, to my ego. Again, I had great people around me. Corey Ma, who taught me to fly floats, said, oh, I'm going to be in the area. I'll come land at your dock. If you feel like it, maybe we can go for a flight. This was about 3 weeks after the accident. It took me a long time to realize he was nowhere near my area. He had flown out of his way to come visit me and get me back in the cockpit. He took me up flying, and he said, do you want to take control? And do you want to fly the takeoff? And I flew the takeoff, and we were up. And he said, do you want to do some steep turns? Do you want to do some stalls? Do you want to just, run through the paces? And it was really fun. And after a while he said, how do you feel? And I said, it feels weird. Like I feel really good. He goes, yeah, because you're a good fucking pilot. You had an accident. It doesn't make you a bad pilot or a bad person. You had an accident and everybody's okay. So that was a tremendous gift. It got me back into flying again, got a new aircraft, flew that for maybe 5 or 6 years, sold that about 6 or 7 years ago, but I just got back into it again in January. Got a new Cirrus SR22 Turbo, and I'm flying like a madman again.
I can't help but pointing out, you used the same phrases that you used when talking about your dad. I mean, like, it's so interesting in terms of like, what did I do? What's the thing that I did? And I think that's so interesting. I'm thinking, how many years, do we go between events, right? And like our brain will still go to the most vulnerable, wound. Like it'll go to the oldest wound.
Yeah.
And you had this, such a visceral opportunity to repair that, because I was curious, like, do you ever fly again? And obviously you did. I want to ask one more kind of fun thing before we say goodbye.
More fun than plane crashes?
I mean, literally. You tell this really funny story about when the request came in to write the Big Bang Theory theme song, and that you were kind of like, I'm not going to do that. And I think it was your wife who was like, I think you may want to Google who Chuck Lorre is. Like,
Yeah.
this is a thing. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit, generally about sort of that, like, what is it when a gut instinct is like, nah, I don't want to do that. And, not just that, like, oh, you may end up writing a song that becomes this famous thing, but in terms of like, what is that, what is the creative hurdle that you had to get over? Or was it just like, sometimes you wake up on the wrong side of the bed and you're like, I don't want to fucking do that. And then you end up doing it. Can you talk a little bit about, because it's such a playful story with such an awesome, ending.
Well, it came at a period where we were working all the time. We were touring nonstop. We were recording, and on top of this incredibly busy schedule, we were getting nonstop requests to write things for film and television. And so a ton of my, quote, time off was spent writing and recording things that never saw the light of day. And so when I got asked to write the theme song for The Big Bang Theory, it was on the heels of 5 or 6 massive disappointments in a row. So I kind of had my guard up, actually. I was like, I need a break right now. And I just don't want to waste time on this if it's never going to see the light of day. And because what I slowly learned was, at first you're like, oh, wow, they've asked us to write the title, the opening title for Shrek 2. Like, that is so cool. And you don't realize they've asked 30 other bands to do the same thing, And so I spend all this time writing about, the character's journey and everything they said they wanted in the song. And then they just go with a Counting Crows song called Accidentally in Love. And, I kind of thought, like, well, I could have written you a hit song. Like, I do those too, but you asked me to write this specific thing, which I did. And then you just picked the pop song. So after many disappointments, I kind of, with my helmet on and shield up, took the first call with Chuck and Bill and said, look, how many other artists have you asked to write this song? Because I've just come off 18 months of touring. I'm tired. I have 12 days at the lake with my family. And if you've already asked 20 other people to write it, then good luck. I hope it turns out great. And I remember Bill saying, we really like your band. And we haven't asked anyone else. We really want you to compose the theme song for this show we're developing. And I was like, oh, sorry, I came in a little hot there. That was a bit of a self-protection moment. Okay, well, that's lovely. Thank you. Okay, sorry about that. I'll get on this. And I went away from that phone call thinking, oh, I was kind of an asshole there. Never wanted to be that guy. But then, in fact, I did just enjoy my vacation and I didn't get around to writing the song. So I said to my wife, I've got to call these TV guys. And they were really nice on the phone call, but I just never got around to writing the song. So I'm just going to call them and tell them, hey, thank you so much for thinking of me, but I just haven't had time to do this. And I was going to suggest a few people that I thought would be really good. And I said to my wife, I've got this phone call. She said, who's it with? And I said, Chuck Lorre. And she said, do you mean Chuck Lorre? I said, I don't know. I guess so. And she said, you should Google him. And so it was like less than 20 minutes to the phone call. I got in the shower. The whole song came to me in the shower. I called my wife in and said, can you please write this down before I forget it? She wrote down all the lyrics for me. I got out of the shower, threw on a bathing suit, and I recorded The Big Bang Theory into the built-in microphone in my laptop. I didn't even use any external gear. I used GarageBand and the built-in microphone. And I sent it 5 minutes before the conference call. And Chuck and Bill got on and said, you know, at the end where you tag the line, you go, it all started with a big bang, bang. It all started with a big bang. I go, yeah. He goes, can we lose the tag and just do the line once? And I go, yeah. He goes, great. We love it. Biggest thing in my entire career is it's eclipsed everything else I've ever done. And it has been such an amazing relationship. As you know, like we were brought into that family. We were made to feel a part of it. We did the Comic-Con panels. We were there for the taping of the 100th episode. We were brought back in to re-record the theme for the finale, which was such a beautiful bookend to the whole thing. Yeah. Like it is the biggest thing in my career financially, but it's also one of the best things in my career because it was such a cool, interesting beginning to the relationship, and I've just cherished the whole thing.
It's a fantastic story on so many levels. Also, you know, Chuck Lorre is a musician. Like he started as a musician. He played bar mitzvah gigs is what he most, likes to talk about. But he wrote the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles theme song. That is
I know
a Chuck
that.
Lorre. Right, exactly.
I know that now.
But there's something really special, about the quality of your voice, the quality of your music that, I think the ultimately the most special thing about how you created that theme song was that Barenaked Ladies is the kind of music that the characters on The Big Bang Theory listen to. It's like meta upon meta. So the reason that, we would go to Comic-Cons, the reason that we would fill that big, convention hall is because we were a show about the people who go to Comic-Con. We were a show about the people who are the Barenaked Ladies in terms of the geek rock, the nerd rock aspect. And you guys are the guys that made it big, and especially in Jonathan can speak to this. You're the Canadian underdogs. You conquered that a different country with your intelligence, your intellect, this aspect of music that speaks so much to the characters that they made a show about called The Big Bang Theory. So the layers is just
yeah, the synergy was amazing. Yeah, it was the perfect relationship, really. Who do you get to write a show about wonderful nerds? But a bunch of nerdy dudes who are going to be super into it,
Did you all have American success right away? What was the trajectory for you coming out of Canada?
In 1992, we had a couple of hits in Canada leading up to the release of our first record, which then became the biggest selling record by a Canadian band in history up to that point. It went diamond in Canada. We did I think a 76-date Canadian tour that sold out in hours.
Wow.
We felt like we were, how they talk about big bands like U2 and Coldplay send the rig ahead of them to set up in the next town. We felt like we were sending out people to build a town for us to play in next, because how are there 76 places to play in Canada? We have a dozen big cities, right? It was kind of an unprecedented success story and fell on completely deaf ears the moment you went south of the border. We were playing to 14,000 people in London, Ontario, and an hour and a half west, we were playing to 400 people in Detroit. So it just did not cross south of the border. It was another 6 years before we broke in America. So we were playing arenas and selling out everywhere at home. Eventually that dwindled, right? We became yesterday's news in Canada. There's a small pie here, and we ate most of the pieces of it in the early 90s. And then there was no more pie for us. And so we just put all of our effort into breaking in America. And, we got 50 or 60 lucky breaks that all lined up at the right time. And Stunt came out, and I think it debuted at number 2 or number 3 or something. And then we had a number 1 hit and sold millions and millions of records, and our life changed again. We felt like that early Canadian success was kind of a dress rehearsal for American success. We now knew what it was going to feel like, but at a smaller scale. And but we knew what to expect a little bit. And more importantly, we knew it would go away eventually. So when Stunt broke and was huge, we didn't assume it would be forever. And we lived accordingly.
That's really interesting. And this will be a very deep Canadian cut for our Canadian listeners. I wonder what you probably watched, an iconic band, the Tragically Hip, not really make that jump ever. And I'm curious, from your perspective, I don't want to put you on the spot, but what do you make of that never transitioning? Like they were, they're Canadian icons and just sort of never had those 50 or 60 breaks that you talk about. And I wonder, what you make of that. And also if you saw that and were like, oh, wait a second, we may not make that jump.
Yeah. It, in some ways, it's just down to dumb luck. We got some breaks that they didn't get. But I think in other ways, they didn't like scaling down to come to America. They were such huge stars in Canada that I don't think they really enjoyed going and playing small places in the US. And they were so ubiquitous at home. They could do their summer tour and fill massive venues and go across Canada and bring a bunch of friends with them. So I think they put all of their energy into that. I also joke, when they did Saturday Night Live, they played Nautical Disaster. And it's like all the hip fans went, oh, right on. They played a deep cut on Saturday Night Live. And we went, they should have played the hit.
Well, they were almost anti-US in how Canadian they were. And I wonder if that stance kind of, that's a great example of that stance of not really playing to get those breaks. Yeah.
I love those guys. And Gord and I had kids in school at the same time. Our sons played on the same hockey team. So there was a constant back and forth for play dates between our kids. I love those guys, and they're one of the best live bands our country ever produced. The reason it didn't click in America is just down to dumb luck. It could have. They could have exploded and been huge. It just didn't happen. And it happens all the time. It happens for bands in America that are amazing and never really click with a broader following. I could list dozens of bands that I think are among the best recording artists today that should have a huge appeal, and it just hasn't clicked for them.
So interesting. I will wrap with my one plug, which is that I have a second cousin named Alan Fogel, who's probably the biggest Barenaked Ladies fan that has ever existed.
I know Alan Fogel well. He was at our... He has I think his website or his handle online is the Hypo.
I can't.
He's obsessed. All I know is he's obsessed.
He has told me chords to my own songs when I've forgotten them. And the other night at our 35th anniversary show, I forgot the first verse to a song and Alan yelled it out from the crowd.
No!
So I know your cousin Alan.
Yeah, so he's my second cousin, my dad's first cousin's son, and he's going to go crazy that we're having this conversation.
He's a good guy. He's one of those rare fans that has crossed the Rubicon to be a friend. I know who he is. I recognize him whenever I see him. I chat with him, And he's a good human.
Now that I've heard the full story of how you wrote the Big Bang Theory theme, I feel even worse that we approached you to write the theme song for this podcast, but it makes it all the more special that you did. And we really, really appreciate you being part of such a huge aspect of our podcast, and the distinctiveness of your voice and your musical contribution. Really, it means so much to us. And it's just so much fun to get to talk to you.
I was so honored when you asked me to write the theme song. I feel like I owe such a debt of gratitude to Bill and Chuck and that entire family. I would do anything for all of you at any point. And now my life is much less hectic than it was when I was asked to write the theme song for the Big Bang Theory. So whatever you need, anytime.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to hear you share so many aspects of your life, musical and personal and psychological and developmental. We really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. What a lovely treat. I listen to your podcast all the time, so it's a real thrill.
We know you're mostly listening just to hear the theme song.
Yeah, I usually turn it off after the theme song, but I do listen regularly.
I didn't think I'd find a Canadian I'm more fond of than I am of you, but Ed Robertson's a pretty close second.
We're a country filled with amazing people, just waiting to be discovered by America.
There's so many things that I wanted to do a deep dive in this episode with Ed, but the thing that really struck me so strongly was his, I don't know that he thinks of it like this, his definition of what revenge does, or withholding, is that it's the poison that you drink thinking you're hurting someone else. And when he talked about how he didn't have to be a shitty son just because his dad was a shitty dad, in the words of his therapist, that story of that journey for him really, really touched me. I mean, how many times do we try and punish people by withholding our good behavior, our presence, and it doesn't do anything except breed an ulcer for us, or more hatred, or more resentment. And, the distinction that he made was he did not feel this was an abusive situation, which obviously, it's not me and Jonathan advocating for be nice to people who were shitty to you. But the notion that, what you give attention grows.
And how much joy he felt by being able to be of service and communicate to his dad and participate in his dad's life, even if it was, very in small ways, and bringing his kids there. This is a touchy subject because on one hand, you want to be protective when there's an emotional wound or if you feel unsafe in any way. And on the other hand, it sort of sounded more like he was reconciling some of his own past hurts and being able to show up in a way that actually provided him a lot of comfort and peace in the days or year before his father passed away.
And also, it sounds like for him, it was an opportunity for healing. And I think so many times we assume that if we're going to heal, it has to come from someone else's change in behavior and someone else's apology. And here's what they're going to do to make me feel better because I deserve it. And especially if someone hurt you or if they neglected you, I deserve you treating me better. That's what I deserve. And instead, what he was able to say was, what if the way that I heal is by behaving like a person of dignity? And like a person who has more recovery than this person. That's an act of compassion. And to be able to give, in this case, his father the opportunity to sit with his kids and to say, what can I do for you? How can I be kind to you? And it's funny, when I asked about his father, who he's spoken about, in other places, he had a beautiful interview in Psychology Today a few years ago. He said, my father was a really, really, a highly functional and really damaged person. A really, really, a sick man. And, what I first asked him, my instinct, I don't know why I got this instinct, was my first way that I wanted to have him talk about his dad was, what was he drinking for? What was he covering? What do you know about him? And that's not to say that, anytime I hear like someone had an alcoholic parent or an abusive parent, it's like, oh, but feel bad for them. That's not where I was going with it. Where I was going is I know this is a man who has a lot of emotional intelligence. He's exceptionally smart. He's very in touch with his feelings. I know that he's done so much work. That's the perspective that I was hoping he'd be able to provide. And then what an interesting turn of events to hear that he was really able to kind of turn that around and heal himself, even if the other person wasn't ready to do it the way he wanted.
Very powerful. On a slightly lighter note, I wanted to circle back to country music in Canada. I just want everyone to know we have pickup trucks, we have dogs, we have heartbreak, therefore we have country music. The only difference is that our pickup trucks have snow tires and sometimes a snowplow on the front.
So this is a thing. And like, I didn't want to sound stupid in front of Ed Robertson, but I don't mind sounding stupid in front of you. When you talk about country music, like, are there I'm going to ask, I have to ask it. I couldn't ask it in front of him.
Don't do it. I feel a question coming on.
Are there places in the country of Canada where it's like cowboys?
Yeah, all the places that aren't cities.
Do they wear boots? Do they wear boots?
Yeah, and hats. You've never been to the Calgary airport or the Calgary Stampede?
Oh, no. No, haven't been. Oh, no.
Look, to be fair, the top half of the country is frozen and no one wears cowboy boots because their feet would freeze. But yeah, Calgary is very Montana-esque. I mean, they probably don't want to be considered Montana-esque, but it's a shared culture of cowboys and cowboy hats and horses.
Do they? Okay, here's another question. They talk different?
He was talking about the maritime provinces, and they sound, to me, as different as someone from the South sounds to someone in New York. Like the maritime provinces sound completely foreign to me.
What's it sound like?
I don't even know if I can't even do that accent. That is a different type of Canadian that I don't fully have. What I did want to talk to him about was my impression. I don't think I've done it on the show of the standard Canadian hockey player post-game interview.
Go for it.
So, the game went pretty well, and we were trying our best, and we were just playing as a team, and we just kept giving it our all, and you had to keep dumping and chasing and going after it, and you can add a little. We were mucking and grinding, and we're just giving it our best, one shift at a time, and we got to keep our heads on and thinking about each other, and we got to know what to do next, and play smart, and always be together.
That's what you sound like every day that I speak to you.
Exact same. Look, we didn't even get into this level of Canadiana with Alanis Morissette. She's a Canadian we didn't reference. I also feel like as a Canadian musician, he probably knows all the Canadian musicians. I liked his defense of Nickelback, the story about Gord Downie. And for Americans who do not know who the Tragically Hip is, they're probably one of the most famous bands in Canada that never expanded. Do you remember the documentary? I think it's like Saving Sugarman or Finding Sugarman. It's this guy who doesn't realize that he's famous in South Africa. He's like this traveling musician. It's like, I don't know. This is not the same as the Tragically Hip at all, but there's something like almost magical about their fame in Canada that, they're almost unknown in most other parts of the world. And obviously Gord passed and that was a tragedy, but what a poet that guy is.
What I thought was really interesting was when he said that they'd play for, I don't know, like 14,000 on your side of the border and then 400, in Detroit, just south of the border. And I believe that there was a lot of luck. I do. I believe there's a lot of opportunity there. But also, there's something about a lifestyle that not every band can do that back and forth of, in the place where we come from, it's like a whole, Canada, it's just a border, but it's a very different place. And to be able to say, like, we're going to go to a different place where we're playing for 400 people, like, it's an enormous up and down, that I don't know that every band would want to do.
Totally. The willingness, the work that they put in. I actually really liked hearing how he thought that, it prepared them for the fragility of fame, that it could all go away, going back and forth between these big crowds and, being humbled by 400 person audiences. I really think that's an important lesson to keep them humble, or keep your perspective on what you're going through, because I can imagine, I haven't experienced this, but when you get rock and roll fame like that, it can feel like it's never going to end, which we know is untrue. I mean, Howie Mandel had that quote to us. He's like, no matter how famous you are in a generation, people don't even know who the Beatles were.
I mean, the thing that I kept coming back to, is this notion of him. I don't know if he considers himself straight edge, which is what we used to call it, back in the day, when people made the decision to not partake, of drugs or alcohol. But I can't help but like imagine what the parallel universe might have been, if that hadn't been his path, and and if they had a different, kind of party trajectory, like how that would have changed it, or if this is just some people don't drink and other people do, but the vast majority, this is my completely unofficial statistician at work, the vast majority of musicians that I have known, heard of, or thought about also do engage in a lifestyle that typically, is mind altering in some way. And so I could barely be at a party with drunk people. I can't imagine playing gigs like that, playing festival. Like, I've been to Glastonbury, it's like a thing.
Yes, I can't imagine that life. Not just the drugs and the alcohol, but just like performing like that and the touring schedule and being away from your family for that length of time. He talked a lot about like, he got these breaks, they got these breaks. And I think there's some predestiny to it also, likely, but I think there's also something about the music that is super universal. Sometimes the bands that don't break out of the places that they're from, and his comment that the Tragically Hip, they got the opportunity to be on Saturday Night Live and they played like this very, very deep cut, almost as an FU to the world, instead of like the hit single that they had. I feel like there's a level of universality to his music. The fact that it gets so stuck in your head, that, is that destined to cross over in a way that if you're not that catchy, it doesn't. It's harder to expand. I don't know. I also think that the way that he describes his writing process felt like it was almost channeling creativity, and he downplayed that. But there was an element of something otherworldly to be able to write with that volume and that being that prolific in short settings. The fact that he did the Big Bang theme song in the shower in 20 minutes, and all of a sudden, like, that's the biggest hit. Like, where does that come from? That comes from some sort of like universal consciousness that he is channeling and then becoming a conduit for. Also, why did he put on a bathing suit after he was in the shower?
That was so weird. He didn't want us to think that he wrote the Big Bang Theory theme naked. Like, I don't care. Be in your skivvies. Be naked. Put on a bathing suit. I'm like, you're going to go swimming for your meeting?
I heard that he was in the shower, got out of the shower, then put on a bathing suit to take the meeting. He didn't have any clean underwear?
And then I was like, maybe he just doesn't want us to think that he wrote the Big Bang theme song in his underwear. But then I was like, I don't really care. And then I was like, maybe is he going to take the meeting from like a jacuzzi tub? Is that what's happening next? No. He didn't want us to think about him writing our whole universe in a hot, dense state naked. Also, I wanted to read before we say goodbye. I did want to read my favorite line from 1 week. My favorite stanza from 1 week. I feel really stupid that I didn't think about, him as a hip hop fan and, kind of the verbal gymnastics that he does. And so I pulled up my favorite lyric, which is I believe it's the third. Yeah, it's okay. I don't know what to call it because 1 week has like, it's got verses, it's got the pre-verses and bridges, and it's very complicated. But my favorite section has a French phrase, and I didn't know that's what he's saying. Jonathan, you're Canadian. What is DANS? New word LA, new word MAISON. Don La Maison? Dance La Maison.
Yeah, it's in the house. Look at me knowing French.
Look at you, Canadian. Watching X-Files with no lights on, we're dans la maison. I hope the smoking man's in this one. Like Harrison Ford, I'm getting frantic. Like Stingham Tantric. Like Snickers Guaranteed to Satisfy. Like Kurosawa, I make mad films. I don't make films, but if I did, they'd have a samurai. That's my favorite thing. And I love Kurosawa. And I was raised watching Kurosawa films. And I remember when I heard this song, I was like, he knows who Kurosawa is. I love it.
To any of our listeners, if their universe is in a hot, dense state, they should hit us up on Instagram at Bialik Breakdown, and remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel,
which is called Mayim Bialik. And from our breakdown to the one we hope you never have, au revoir. We'll see you next time.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, and now she's gonna break down